Welcome to another video tutorial from 2dgameartguru.com. Today I'm working in Inkscape version 1.4 to show you how to create a crayon-style fill pattern. I created the simple illustration with shapes that can be filled with a fill color, but that's not the look I'm after. I want it to look like it's been colored in with crayons. In order to achieve that, I mainly use pattern along paths, pattern fill, and filters. Let's start by creating a simple crayon pattern. The base is a rectangle converted to a path and modified with the node tool to create uneven edges. By moving a few additional nodes with the node tool, I create a more random edge. I chose a rather long rectangle to allow for more variation and a less repetitive look. I select all the new nodes and set them to smooth. I scale the pattern down, create a line with the pen tool and curve it with the node tool to apply the pattern to. I select the pattern, copy it, select the line, assign a path effect pattern along path to it and paste the pattern. Once I set the pattern copies to repeat stretched, it starts to look like the uneven brush stroke I have in mind. The crayon picks up the unevenness of the paper. Adding a few holes to my pattern should achieve that effect. I use simple circles. I place a few in a more or less random pattern, combine them and reuse that segment. Once combined with path union, I duplicate that segment, mirror it, flip it, adjust it with the node tool and fill the length of my pattern. I like to keep an easy to work with copy. I duplicate before combining all elements with path exclusion. I copy the altered pattern with Ctrl+C, select the path, paste the new pattern, and it updates instantly. I can edit my pattern directly with the Edit on Canvas. For now, I'll just scale it down. The straight ends tile nicely, but they do look a little abrupt and boring at the start and the end of my line. I create another copy, edit the nodes at the left and right side for a more irregular start and finish. You could spend more time on the detail, making the lines thinner as they run out. For now, I just want something that is not a straight cut. Using path exclusion, I combine the new circles with the pattern. I copy the pattern, paste it to my curve, and we have a gap, which is to be expected because we don't have the straight lines anymore. I can adjust that by changing the spacing. Putting a negative value in the repeated patterns will overlap and close the gap. Altering the width of the pattern will just squash the height of the pattern. In order to scale it, I use the Edit on Canvas. Alternatively, I could scale my pattern, copy it and paste it. To soften the start and end even more, I can add a linear gradient to fade the ends. Assign the linear gradient from left to right, add additional stops and set only the ends to transparent. Let's take this line and turn it into a squiggle. Every now and then the path will lose the pattern. It's most likely due to its complexity. Moving the nodes and adjusting the angles a little bit should fix that and bring the pattern back. With the pattern being deformed along the path, sharp turns will deform the pattern to extremes. By adding an additional node and smoothing those corners a little bit, you can minimize the deformation and make it less visible. The squiggle will be the base for the pattern fill. I take a duplicate and turn it into a pattern. By using the object pattern objects to pattern, the line is turned into a pattern which can be assigned via the fill panel to any new object. It automatically becomes a repeating pattern that I can scale, rotate and color. But I can't color this one. It looks like the path effect might be stopping that, so I turn the pattern back into objects, convert the path effect to a path, turn it back into a pattern and try again. Create my circle, give it the new fill pattern, scale it down and try and color it. And it seems the shape is just too complex. Let's try with a simpler pattern and see what happens. I have this little guy and I can turn him into a pattern. It's pure black with transparency for the cheeks. If I take him and turn him into a pattern, fill my circle with that, I can scale, rotate and color. Seeing simpler patterns work the way they should, it might be the complexity of the crayon squiggle that prevents it from taking on the color. Changing the color of the pattern within the pattern fill would have been the easiest option. I could create different patterns for different colors, or I could use filter options. Inkscape offers several options to change the color of an object via a filter. I changed the black squiggle to a red one that gives me saturation and lightness to manipulate. I apply a color shift filter, turn the live preview on to make sure I see the result, and can now shift my color to purple, blue, green, orange, brown or turquoise. The filter will only take effect if I press the apply. If I close, the color shift won't happen. When I duplicate the squiggle and turn it into a yellow one, the resulting colors from the color shift will be more on the pastel side and a lot lighter. I go with the yellow one to build the seamless pattern. I create a square that will be the container for my pattern. I set the height and width to match the steps for the cursor keys that I defined earlier. The arrow keys will move any object the same distance as the object is wide. So if I duplicate the square and move it with the arrow keys, it lines up perfectly. If you have not done a seamless pattern in Inkscape, it might be worthwhile looking into earlier videos I recorded. The idea is simple. Any object that overlaps an edge needs to be duplicated and placed on the opposite side to make the pattern seamless. The lighter yellow object overlaps the left side, so it needs to be copied and placed on the right side. The darker one overlaps top, bottom, and left and right, so I need 6 versions of it to make sure that it tiles in all directions. In order to be a little less confusing, I clip all lines inside the rectangle. For that, I turn the rectangle into a clip group and move all the lines inside that clip group. I remove the fill from the clip object, the base square, to make the pattern transparent. I use the pen tool to add some more lines using the path effect, pattern along path with the pattern I created earlier. And adjust the color for some variation. I duplicate the line, curve it, and seeing it's placed on the edge, I need to duplicate it and move it with the arrow keys to be on the opposite sides to make sure the pattern will tile seamlessly. In hindsight, it turned out that the lines are too thick. Thinner lines would have worked better, and I made the change at the very end when I saw the end result, and it was just too much coverage and not enough page showing through. I duplicate the tile, move it with the arrow key to check the seams, and in this quick 2x2 test it looks like the seams are working. I duplicate the clip group and turn the duplicate into a pattern. I like to keep the duplicate as I find it easier and quicker to change without having to turn the pattern back into objects. With the fill pattern created, I switch back to the line art, make a copy of the line art, and that's where I stuffed up. I overcomplicated things. Here's a cut and I start again. I rename the layers, lock the outline and hide it. I delete all the shapes that don't need a fill. I remove the stroke from all shapes and give them a dark fill, lower the opacity to 50% and it shows the overlaps. Those are the areas where the transparent pattern would show through to the shape below. To avoid that, I select all shapes and use the path flatten. It trims the shapes in line with the layer stacking. I color all shapes yellow to match the yellow crayon pattern. I make the line art layer visible again, making sure it is locked and set to multiply. Multiply will show the dark colors but turn whites transparent. I place some white shapes on top of my color layer to make up for the parts I deleted earlier. I can now start applying color changing filters. I use the color shift, turning the saturation down for the petals and lowering the opacity. The center of the flower won't need a color change. I apply the yellow fill pattern. Once I apply the fill pattern to the petals, the yellow will be turned into gray as the color filter is still active and will apply the color shift to any fill color or pattern assigned to the element. Somehow the outline of the circular background shape got lost. I copy the color shape to replace it, add the stroke, remove the fill, and lock that layer again. I continue applying the color shift filters to the shapes, working off the yellow, or in case of the cactus, of red, as I created a second fill pattern with red lines instead of yellow lines. For more color variation, I can lower the shape's opacity or work with different layer blend modes. While other colors are easier to create using the color rise rather than the color shift filter. Be mindful of possible delays when you apply a color filter. Double clicking will apply the filter twice, so the pink pot turned into a turquoise. Undo will bring it back to pink. With all shapes colored, I apply the pattern fill, picking either the yellow or the red, depending on the shape's fill color. The blue seems too light. I change the pattern fill from yellow to red and alter the color shift. As filters can be stacked, this shape now has two filters applied to it, and I'm not quite getting the color I want. In order to start with the plain red, I remove all filters via filters, remove filters. I can now apply a new color shift filter to get a nicer blue. By default, the orientation or rotation of the pattern is set to 0. I change it on some of the objects to make it look more interesting. I want to add some shadows underneath the pots, and I want them to have a blurred edge. If I blur a pattern shape, it will blur the pattern as well. In order to avoid that, I blur a mask over the shadow shape. I take an ellipse, give it the pattern fill, set the color to gray by removing the saturation, place another ellipse on top, blur that, select both shapes and set a mask. I duplicate the shape, scale it, flip it, and place it at the bottom of the layer stack. The gray shapes are now visible through the transparent parts of the pots. One way to fix that is by placing a wide shape above the shadow shapes. I use a similar approach for the shading shapes. Use the pen tool, draw a simple shape to give the top of the pot some shading, fill it with the pattern fill, adjust the color with a color shift filter, alter the layer blend mode, and add a white shape with a gradient as a mask. Alternatively, a duplicate of the shape set to a different blend mode works as well. I'm still not happy with the way it looks. It still looks too clean as all the shapes are perfectly filled. Adding a few lines with the pattern along paths would be a nice touch. I copy the original crayon line, paste it into a new layer situated above the colored shapes, and adjust the scale to match the fill pattern. I changed the lengths, the fill color, and the curve to add more variation and make the fills a little more uneven. Changing colors with the color picker or altering the blend mode make it a quick and easy task. I can also add the transparent gradient to fade one or both ends of the line. For this video, I will leave it at this. I hope you get the idea. There's always more detail I could add, different crayon patterns or different fill patterns to play around with. Give it a try and create your own crayon style. I recorded a video in Affinity Designer prior. It's a slightly different approach, but it can be done in Inkscape using the pen tool, patterns along paths, the pattern fill, and color changing filters. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you did, please subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification, leave a like and a comment, and I will see you again soon.